After the 18th of Brumaire, Napoleon ceases to be merely a lucky general and becomes the de facto ruler of France. Formally, he is the first consul. Collegial government, a constitution, fine words. In reality, all power converges at a single point, in his hands. And he understands this perfectly. For Napoleon, domestic policy is not an end in itself, but a tool meant to serve his universal ambitions, to become the ruler of the world. To conquer Europe and then the world, he first needs to put his own house in order. The key question he addresses immediately is how to hold together a country that, over the previous 10 years, had tried everything from revolutionary ecstasy to political burnout. France was exhausted. It no longer needed slogans. It needed order. And Napoleon offered exactly that. Stability instead of chaos, governability instead of endless experimentation. The first thing he understood was simple. France could shout about liberty, equality, and fraternity as much as it wanted. But without the support of major institutions, no regime lasts long. So Napoleon turned to the Catholic Church. Not to repent, but to negotiate. The Concordat of 1801 sounded like the compromise of the century. Catholicism was once again recognized as the main religion. The Church accepted that its lands had already been sold, and the state began paying priests' salaries. In return, the Church swore loyalty. A brilliant move. The people were satisfied, the Church was back in business, and Napoleon gained a crucial bonus, a sense of legitimacy. The irony, of course, is that he would later be excommunicated after annexing the Papal States. But that would come later. For now, the alliance was temporary, like all the best alliances in history. As a result, the Church was once again integrated into the system, and the system worked for him. But an alliance with the Church alone was not enough. Legitimacy is fragile, especially in a country where, just yesterday, overthrowing the government every couple of years was considered legitimate. So Napoleon acted more simply and more harshly. He made himself the sole source of stability. Not a symbol of the revolution, not its heir, but the man who, in essence, brought the revolution to a halt. He did not invite the French to participate in politics. He invited them to stop participating altogether. Napoleon's constitution, for example, was drafted within a single month and approved by a plebiscite controlled by the police. In exchange, the state took responsibility for everything else. Security, order, predictability. Laws no longer changed every season, money regained its value, and tomorrow stopped looking like a lottery. For a society exhausted by constant tension, this was enough. In 1802, he became consul for life. In 1804, emperor. Yes, the journey from "we are against monarchy" to "crown me immediately" took only a few years. France barely noticed how it made a full somersault in midair and returned to the very point from which it had fled so fervently. And now comes the most amusing part, the image. Napoleon was, in a sense, a child of the revolution. Yet after seizing power, he began playing the role of the very king, whose predecessor the French had sent to the guillotine. Napoleon did not simply rule, he performed. Half Frenchman, half Roman. Laurel wreaths, armless marble busts, the empire style. This entire aesthetic of, I am the new Caesar but with art direction. He constantly referenced ancient Rome, suggesting that France was not moving backward but reclaiming greatness. Historical spoiler. When a leader starts talking about reviving the Roman Empire, it never ends quietly. But the external pomp was just a curtain. Inside, Napoleon built a maximally rational and rigid system of power. His main goal was control. And here the real inner workings begin. First, the press. Freedom of speech? It existed. It passed. Out of roughly 60 independent publications, he left 13, and even those under supervision. Napoleon personally intervened in editorial policy, because news is a weapon, and weapons had to be in his hands. Newspapers turned into official bulletins of success, where France always won, the emperor was always right, and problems either did not exist or were temporarily absent. Second, the police. The Minister of Police was Joseph Fouché, a legendary figure. He had managed to betray the monarchy, the revolution, the Jacobins, and the Directory. And that was precisely why Napoleon chose him. The logic was simple and cynical. If this man had sold out everyone before, then he knew exactly how it was done. But trust was zero. So Napoleon built a surveillance system with a nested structure. The first layer was surveillance of everyone. Spies in salons, informers in cafes. Rumors collected the way likes are collected on social media. The second layer was surveillance of Fouché himself. Because if anyone was going to betray him, it would be Fouché. The third layer was surveillance of those who were watching Fouché. Yes, Napoleon monitored the monitoring of the monitoring. This was not paranoia. It was the French version of management. At the same time, he codified power legally. In 1804, the Napoleonic Code appeared. And here, the distinction matters. In the economy, it brought order, rationality, unified rules, modernization. It was convenient for business, beneficial for the state, and later copied across Europe. But family law was a different story. Women's rights were cut without sentiment. After marriage, a woman lost control over her property, her wages, her children, and her place of residence. Adultery meant prison. For men, at most, embarrassment, if it was too obvious. And yes, historians like to hint that one can sense Napoleon's personal resentment toward Josephine here. When personal trauma becomes law, it is always a warning sign. In the end, as the historian Tocqueville put it, the French themselves allowed Napoleon to create a new absolutism. They had grown disillusioned with the republican ideals of the revolution and were willing to give up freedom in exchange for stability, at the price of servitude, but servitude in the name of the ideas of one man of small stature. And now comes the most interesting part. Once Napoleon had put the country in order, once the dictatorship could function without his constant presence, he returned to what he knew best, war with all of Europe. Having dealt with domestic affairs, Napoleon did what all of this had essentially been designed for. He looked beyond France, and he saw Europe, fragmented, exhausted, conflict-ridden, and completely unprepared for what was about to begin. Napoleon did not have a plan to fight a little. He had a plan to remake the continent, and quickly. He assembled an army enormous by the standards of the time, introduced mass conscription, and turned war into a matter not of mercenaries but of entire nations. Young men aged 20 to 24 were sent into the army, and then an important psychological moment followed. Napoleon did not command from afar. He was constantly on the battlefield, next to his soldiers, under fire, in mud and smoke. Over the course of his career, he took part in at least 6 dozen battles, and his army worshipped him. Gradually, the French army ceased to be simply French. As conquests expanded, Germans, Italians, Dutch, Poles, and Austrians flowed into its ranks. This was no longer a national army, but a European military machine assembled under a single brand, Napoleon. Coalitions formed against him, many coalitions. The first, the second, the third. The count was quickly lost. It was like seasons of a television series, where each new one begins with the promise, "Now we will finally stop him." And every time, something went wrong. The climax comes in 1805, with the Battle of Austerlitz. France against Austria and Russia. Napoleon pretends to be weak, lures his opponents in, breaks their plan apart, and strikes where he is least expected. The result is a rout. This is not just a victory. It is a demonstration of a new kind of warfare, where numbers matter less than speed, maneuver, and cold calculation. After this, the Holy Roman Empire, which had existed for almost 1,000 years, simply disappears. In 1806, it is officially dissolved. Historical update installed. Next, Prussia falls. Within a few months, Napoleon destroys one of the most respected armies in Europe. Berlin is occupied, and the myth of the invincible Prussian military machine is shattered. Then comes a new war with Russia, ending in the Peace of Tilsit. Formally, an alliance. In reality, a temporary truce between people who do not trust each other. In the conquered territories, Napoleon follows the same pattern everywhere. In some places, he directly annexes lands to France. In others, he creates dependent states. Elsewhere, he places his brothers on the throne. Yes, at one point, almost all of Europe is governed by Napoleon's relatives. And here a subtle problem arises. If people are going to live under a dictatorship, they at least want the dictator to be charismatic. When a brother arrives instead, enthusiasm drops sharply. Nevertheless, reforms arrive along with the armies. The abolition of serfdom, religious tolerance, schools, universities, a bureaucratic administration, the Napoleonic Code, the metric system. Europe begins to live by unified rules, sometimes voluntarily, more often under pressure. It is modernization and occupation at the same time. But there is one opponent Napoleon cannot defeat directly. England, an island, a navy, money, and industry. A landing proves impossible, so Napoleon decides to strangle it economically. Thus, the continental system is born, a ban on trade with England for all European countries. The idea is logical. The implementation is disastrous. Smuggling flourishes, allies sabotage the restrictions, and the economy cracks under the strain. The most problematic front becomes Spain. In 1807, Napoleon sends around 100,000 soldiers there, deposes the king, and places yet another brother on the throne. And then something begins that the French army was not prepared for: a people's war. Guerrillas, ambushes, sabotage, constant tension. Spain turns into a quagmire in which the army gets bogged down for years. With British support and the involvement of Arthur Wellesley, the future Duke of Wellington, resistance only grows stronger. This war leaves its mark even on art. French painters depict triumphs and coronations. The Spanish painter Francisco Goya depicts fear, violence, and despair. His works are not about glory, but about the cost of conquest. By the beginning of the second decade of the 19th century, Napoleon controls almost all of continental Europe. But the system is malfunctioning. Allies are dissatisfied, the economy is suffering, Spain is not subdued, England is not broken, and the Eastern partner increasingly ignores the rules of the game. And at this moment, Napoleon makes the decision that will change everything. He decides that the problem can be solved the same way as all the previous ones: with an army, the largest Europe has ever seen. And it is from this decision that the road to 1812 begins, to the war with Russia, which will become Napoleon's grave.